Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you may be watching from. My name is Andrew ZOLTY, but I've come to find there are too many Andrews in this world, so please just call me ZOLTY, like Beyonce or Prince. I'm just a ZOLTY. And what I want to talk to you about today is what it looks like when you gather together an amazing small group of mechanical engineers, industrial designers, electrical engineers, software developers, and artists, all in the name of creating some of the most cutting-edge art in the world. What does that look like when you hang it in a home, in an apartment? What does it look like in the lobby of a building, hanging from the ceiling of an airport, and ultimately to the center of a city? A gigantic piece that is moving and changing, that is kinetic, that is using real-time data, that is really using all of the farthest reaching tech that we have today in a sculpture. That is what we do at Breakfast. That is what we've been doing for the last 12 years, is creating some of the absolute most cutting-edge tech to make art. And what has come out of that is extremely exciting, extremely nuts, and where we're headed next is really quite fascinating. And so what I want to do today is talk you through how we got here, our process, how we make this kind of crazy stuff, and ultimately what we're working on now and where it's headed in the next few years, which gets very, very exciting for cities in particular. So I'm not going to go back 12 years, but I'm going to go back 6 years to when we really started to create what I would consider the kind of art that we are creating today. And what that piece was that we made about 6 years ago was called the thread screen. The thread screen was 6,400 mechanical spools of thread that could rotate through 36 different colors and became a dynamic canvas for anyone in the world to use. So you would go on Instagram, you would add the specific hashtag, and then your image would get into the queue and show up in that series there. And this piece was mind-bending both in its success as well as just watching all of these people around the world utilize this really unique piece of technology, and it almost killed us. It took us about 1.5 years to figure out the tech to get this to work. The results were amazing, but at the end of it, we had kind of a bittersweet feeling. We'd spent all of this time, all of this energy, and all of this money to create something that was only ever intended to work for about a week or two, which is what we did. It only ran for 1 week, this piece. And at the end of it, we were just kind of staring at it as it started to collect dust, saying, like, there's something wrong with this process. We need to be able to create art that is going to last. No one is going to want to buy a piece that is just going to hang on their wall and work for a short period of time. And so out of this, we decided what we need to do is we need to start creating mediums. We need to start creating our own bronze, our own clay, and perfect those mediums. Perfect them to the point where if it takes us 1.5 years, it takes us 5 years to perfect the technology. Let's do that, and then we can spend the rest of our lives pushing these mediums as far as we can push them. And so that is what we've been doing for the last few years. And what I want to do is I want to take you through today a couple of these mediums that we have developed and some that we are currently working on. Specifically, I want to start with our flip discs. Flip discs are these tiny little discs that flip back and forth from one side to another. We did not invent flip discs. You can still see these in less and less locations, but even buses, older buses around New York, or in airports around the world, they're still kind of hiding in certain places, and they move like this. They move at like 3 or 4 frames a second. We got our hands on them actually a couple years before we did the thread screen. We had gotten our hands on this old tech that is from the 60s essentially, and we managed to turn that at the time into this installation that was a couple blocks from here in Midtown Manhattan. And we had managed to get it to go from 3 or 4 frames a second to about 15. But when we decided to start making mediums, we looked at flip discs and said, this is an interesting place for us to start. And that's exactly what we did. We went and we took this tech that hadn't been updated for 50, 60 years, and we said, what can we do to this and really make it a medium for ourselves that we can rely on, that we know is going to last decades, maybe even centuries with the right bit of maintenance behind it. And so we developed these panels. We did it once, we did it twice. We kept perfecting and perfecting it to the point where we got them not just to be this robust medium, but we really pushed the tech. These physical pixels that originally only moved at 3 or 4 frames a second, we had hacked the old stuff to get to about 15 frames a second. now move at 60 frames per second. So that's 60 flips back and forth of these physical discs. And so we started to get commissioned to create these artworks all around the world. This is at the Wonder Museum in Chicago. But at the time, they were just these large black and white interactive pieces. Very cool, but clearly not pushing it in terms of art. And so it was about 2 years ago that we really wanted to push ourselves more into the fine art world. And we started to see what we could really do with this tech. And so what we did is we went and we refined all of the engineering once again. We slimmed it down. We wanted to make something that could cover the entire side of this building, or could hang in someone's home. And so this was the first piece we tried out in this regard. This was called Svalbard Ice, and it was connected to the real-time data in Svalbard, Norway, which is in the Arctic Circle. And so we took this and we really wanted to make a piece that was about something that mattered to us, which was climate change. And so what this piece does is it is constantly changing its visualization based on the real-time temperatures in Svalbard. So the gold represents it being warmer, the blue represents it being colder. And so what you're looking at here is this balance of the two, which means it's about the average temperature that we would, I guess, hope. And then as more blue presents itself, that means it's below average, which unfortunately does not happen for us very much. And what does unfortunately happen is there's a lot more gold and gold showing up the warmer that it is there. And then we take this and we apply it to all of our pieces are interactive. So when you walk up to the piece, if it's very warm and above average temperatures, your reflection in the piece will be entirely solid gold, and then we'll step down accordingly. So this was the first piece where we're really trying to push the art side of this technology and trying to get the messages that mattered to us into them. And at the time, we had been talking with Christie's, the auction house here, and they got very interested in acquiring one of our pieces. And so they acquired Svalbard Ice and put it into their contemporary art and post-war auction, where it proceeded to sell for about 4 times the amount that it was expected. That was then followed up by us being invited to a couple of the biggest art fairs. This is at TAFAF, which is the 2nd or 3rd biggest art fair in the world, where the piece on the left-hand side is visualizing the real-time water levels in Venice, Italy, and the piece on the right is visualizing the real-time CO2 levels in Hawaii. And those sold right off the wall, and the art world really started to respond to this, as well as commercial instances where we were creating large-scale versions of these going into lobbies, things of that sort. So over the past 2 years, we have been getting inundated with requests for these and have continued to make all these different artworks. This is a tides piece, which visualizes the tide going in and out in real time of a remote beach. We have these other pieces that compare traditional energy production versus clean energy production, again in real time. So over time, these pieces hopefully will shift more and more to that clean energy production, giving you this really beautiful artwork that is telling a story. This is a piece called Time Capsule, which was commissioned by Harvard for one of their new buildings. And what this does is, as you can see me walking across this piece, you'll see that it's capturing all of those interactions and replaying them back. And what this piece does is it's actually recording down every interaction of anyone that walks up to the piece. And the idea is over the next 10, 20, 30 years, all of these people that have walked through Harvard and interacted with this piece, when no one's standing in front of it, it replays them back. You can see someone who just interacted with it this morning, all the way back to someone, eventually 10 years ago or something of that sort. And lately, we've been trying again to continually push this medium even further, and we started to play around with some artificial intelligence, where in this case, we took a very simple hand sketch that you can see here on the left. We run it through artificial intelligence to try and create a bunch of quote-unquote paintings based off of that sketch. And in this case, we resulted on these two, the middle and the right image, and we printed one on one side of the disc and one on the other to create a piece that's called Empire State. And it visualizes the current state of Manhattan, specifically where the Empire State Building is, at wherever this piece is in the world. So as you'll see here, this is visualizing the real-time cloud cover, the direction those clouds are going. The lighting, you'll see in a moment, is on this side of the building, and now you will see it transition to nighttime. So now the lights come on in the building, it's starting to rain. And so this piece is really, again, us trying to push this medium further and further, all built on something that is designed to truly last decades and decades with hopefully no maintenance whatsoever. So I use flip disk just as a way to really show how we develop these mediums. We work very hard to perfect them and then really push them in an artistic sense. But we are not a flip disk art studio. We are a digital kinetic art studio. And so once we had perfected our flip discs, we had started to explore what our next medium should be. And in this case, this is where we came up with Brixels. We wanted to make something that was completely ours. Where flip discs, we knew, we did not invent the original disc. In this case, we wanted to do something that we could truly own through and through and make something different. And Brixels was inspired from this exact video that I shot waiting for a train a couple years back, where sometime in January, February, you can see the sun is at the right height and it's casting everyone's shadow on the platform onto this fence. It's this really mesmerizing image. And I brought this back to the studio, and we all just kind of racked our brains to see that, what could we do with something like this? And this is what yielded our first prototype called Mirror, our Brixel Mirror, which I'll play here, which are these kinetic bricks that can rotate indefinitely in either direction, and really just is an absolutely mesmerizing, beautiful piece that's the standalone sculpture that we then wanted to, as you'll see in a moment, bring what we saw on that train platform back with this interaction, playing with the light and the dark, and allowing people to see their reflections and interact with this surface. So from here, we went and we continued to perfect this medium. This is a piece called Pool, which I love how the reflections are kind of cascading up onto the ceiling there. This piece, which used our second version of Brixels, allows you to sweep your hand over the top of the piece as though it's dragging it through the water. And this piece is connected to a lake, Lake Chapala in Mexico, which is receding due to climate change. And as that lake changes its water level, it changes how this piece reacts. And if it rains on that lake, you'll actually see ripples move across the surface. We followed up this piece with a piece called Awaken, which you can kind of use your arm to draw across the surface and awaken these bricks, and then they slowly kind of fall back to sleep, quote unquote. And this piece, we just were commissioned to create a new edition of this, which is in Dubai at the Dubai World Expo that just opened a couple weeks ago in the Kazakhstan Pavilion. And then this next piece is really shows off the kind of Brixels pieces that we are making today. Before I hit play on it, I'll give it a bit of a setup. So Equinox came to us, and they had this grand wall that is moving up through their brand new global headquarters over in the Hudson Yards, a couple blocks away from here. And they wanted to do a really central artwork. And when we got commissioned to do this, we wanted to create some kind of connection between the employees that work there and all of the members that they have all around the world. And so what we decided to do is to take the data of when a member would go into a gym and tap their card to go in, we wanted to take those taps. And we wanted that to drive how this piece moved and all the visualizations that occurred on it. So when I hit play, you'll see all these raindrops falling down. And each one of those raindrops is someone in real time tapping their card somewhere in the world. And then we created all these different visualizations that move throughout the piece. And it became something where all of the employees, over the course of a couple hours or even a couple days, they can see the changes. They can see when there's a busy moment or a quieter moment. And it creates this beautiful artwork, but also this lovely connection between the employees and those members. And so since then, we continue to push this medium further and further. This is a piece that is visualizing the sounds in a rainforest. We have other pieces that look like they belong at Burning Man. We're really starting to push the form of what these pieces can be and really just blowing up the scale. This was a piece that was going to happen in a skyscraper in China in the lobby that's just really massive. Each brick is about a half meter, maybe more than that, wide. And so we really just are at the beginning of pushing what we're able to do with Brixels. They've only really been around for about a year and a half. And we are in the process of creating some really amazing pieces there. I'm now going to jump ahead to our most recent medium and recent piece that we unveiled, which happened this summer in Denver, where they came to us. We had a real estate developer come to us and say they're building this amazing new tower, and they have 2 stories of glass in the lobby, and they saw an opportunity to put some kind of art there. And they actually came to us wanting a Brixels piece, but we felt like there was a bigger opportunity for something that had more dimension to it, and you could really walk around it and really see it from the sidewalk and across the street and so forth. And we came up with this piece and this medium called reeds. And in this case, this piece is called Cedar Point Reeds, and it's connected back to the wind that is blowing through the Cedar Point wind farm, which is close by to Denver. And so as that wind, whatever that wind is doing at that wind farm, is changing the way the piece moves, as well as how it illuminates. That represents the wind production, or sorry, the energy production from the wind. And like with all of our pieces, it is interactive. As you step up to it, the reeds will gather in front of you, and they will begin to follow you as you walk along the side of the piece. And something I don't have in this video is what's really amazing is you can get 30 or 40 people around the piece, and it will subdivide, and everyone kind of gets this nice little beautiful clump of reeds in front of them. So here you can really start to see that lobby. And what I find most interesting and fascinating about what's happened with this piece is because it's so exposed to the city, to the sidewalk, to the people walking by it, even though it was commissioned by a private entity, and really for, in their minds, to get people into this lobby, to potentially sell space in the building, it's become a public artwork in Denver. It's become something where at night you can see tons of people gathering around and taking Instagrams of it. And I think it's a really interesting case study of how a private entity in some ways can provide something that is truly beneficial to themselves, but really creates something for the city as well. And it's been a true success. And now, the fun part in my mind, which is what we are working on today and where we are going, which unfortunately, all the projects we seem to be working on right now are 2 to 3 year timelines where we can't say anything. But what has changed is we are not just pushing the mediums that we have created, and we are not just working on like 2, I think we're working on about 4 new mediums, but we're really trying to push things outdoors and much larger in scale, specifically into the public art realm. Now, we started with mediums that we had. We started with taking our brixels and saying, well, can we weatherize these? Can we get these to work in the outdoor environment? Can we make them resilient despite where they might end up in the world? We started in that place. And then we started also saying, do they need to exist in these rectangles? Do we always need to be making these kind of rectangular pieces? So we started playing with form with our brixels. And this is a piece called Vitals, which visualizes how a city feels, meaning we look at sentiment analysis of articles that are being posted and social media posts to figure out, is the city excited, is it scared, and what is the heartbeat of it? And so you can kind of see this pulsing effect that runs through this piece. But again, really trying to play with the form and the meaning. And then this is one of my absolute favorites. This was being commissioned to go on a pier in New York, and unfortunately, the deal fell apart there. I hope one day we can find a way to bring it to life. But this is the sea level lighthouse, which turns the idea of a lighthouse on its head, where it is warning about the impending sea, where normally a lighthouse is warning you about the impending land, and it visualizes in real time what the water level is. But again, it's really just pushing the form, pushing what we can do with this medium. But as I said, we are also really pushing what we can do in terms of mediums themselves, and trying to find pieces that can have maybe a small footprint, but really still make a big impact. This piece is visualizing the trending topic that is happening around the world. So at the base of it, there's a small display. And whatever the world is most talking about at that moment, it creates a quote-unquote wind, and it moves the piece accordingly. So the more social posts, the more articles being posted about that topic, the stronger the wind that is moving across the surface of this piece. And then this is my absolute favorite piece and medium that we are currently working on, which is called, the medium is called flex bands or flex rings. They are these spring steel, stainless steel pieces with many actuators and rotating pieces and all this chaos. And the piece itself is called Zakrit Wind because in Qatar, there's Zakrit Beach, where there are these rock formations that have been formed by all of this wind blowing the sand across the surface and etching them into a shape that you're kind of seeing here. And that same wind is what is carving, quote unquote, this sculpture into its shape. And it is also affected by the people that walk up to it. And so where we are going is we are really just beginning to scrape the surface of what is possible with the future of public art. but we see an opportunity that is truly massive. It feels as though when you look at our world, we are absolutely living in the future. The fact that I'm talking to an empty room and yet I'm talking to thousands and thousands of people is just obviously the tip of the iceberg of the world we're living in. But I would dare to say that our art is not matched to that as of today. And we are really trying to engineer and put forth all of this amazing tech that exists in our world into pieces that can still be sustainable, that can still have a strong message and can evolve with our times, as we have seen many sculptures that have not quite recently. And so I want to wrap with a story that is quite analogous, I would say, to what breakfast is doing and where we stand, which is with the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower, while it is this thing that is beloved by most of humanity, the world around, and is a pride of those in France, I would say, I think, fair enough, it was hated when it was first proposed. It was not just hated for what it looked like, but it was also being told that it could never work. It was going to fall down. At that point, nothing by humans had been built taller than 200 meters, and they were proposing the Eiffel Tower at 300 meters. And all the architects, all the engineers said, this can't be done. You're going to kill people. It's going to be horrible. It's just going to break. It's going to be an embarrassment. And all the artists and painters and the like said, this thing is ugly. This is horrible. We cannot allow this to happen. And in fact, they created the Committee of 300. So 300 artists, architects, engineers, each for every meter tall that the Eiffel Tower would be, and they just started protesting like crazy, saying we have to stop the construction of this. And this is one of my favorite quotes. We, writers, painters, sculptors, architects, and passionate devotees of the hitherto untouched beauty of Paris, protest with all of our strength, with all our indignation, in the name of slighted French taste, against the erection of this useless and monstrous Eiffel Tower. This thing was hated by artists. No one thought it could be built. And this is essentially my daily life. This is me going into rooms and people saying, this isn't going to work. This is going to break. This is not art. This is not what we think of when we think of public art. And yet this is the mission that we are on at Breakfast. We are trying to show the world what is possible. We are looking to make the modern day Eiffel Tower, these iconic signature pieces that can represent a city, even a country, and truly be beautiful and truly be using the modern technology that exists in our world. So with that, I truly hope that you can join us on this mission. And if you see those opportunities, we hope we are able to work with you to bring more of this into the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Zolty.
Sure.
Got lots of questions from the audience.
Oh, cool.
Love to chat and discuss a little bit more.
Let's do it.
So what kind of drew you, one of the questions from Anthony here, is to public art and interactivity, of kind of linking these two things together.
Yeah, it's, I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, Breakfast it's kind of just all we've ever done in terms of, really everything we make is all about creating connection. We're trying to connect people to other places, other times, and we try to do that through very, very basic interactions. So we've been creating all different types and experiments for years doing that. But the truth is we didn't start with art at all. We actually started kind of not knowing what we wanted to do. We created a lot of like random hacky things that ended up on the Engadgets and Gizmodos of the world. And eventually we were getting into more brand work because it was hard to find people to pay for this stuff. And where it netted out is we just realized that the pieces we were coming up with on our own were always significantly better, as most creatives can appreciate, than the things that, you know, brands would limit us to. And it took us a while to get to the point where we could start to play on our own. And it became really clear that the art world is where it was meant to be. And then, to be honest, you know, we always look for opportunities where it just feels like perhaps things are behind the times. And the art world, dare I say, you know, while there's the NFT explosion that is occurring, the physical art hasn't changed tremendously over the years.
How do you, another question here, how do you gather the data? You know, where does that, is that historic data or is it live? What's the connection?
It's almost always live, and so we're just utilizing APIs. Again, coming back to us wanting to make all of our pieces last, we select data sources that we believe will be around the longest. So we use a lot of whether it's government APIs, there's a lot of city APIs, there's a lot of universities, so we try to source that, but almost all of our pieces are utilizing this real-time data, and we build them in a way where that data source can be swapped quite easily if something ever happened, or even has a few backups if necessary.
All right. Another question here seems to be kind of a bit of theme. We heard you talk a little bit around climate change, sea level rise. Is that an explicit part of the storytelling, or is that kind of behind the scenes that has to be revealed? How does that storytelling told as part of the installation?
Yeah, you mean, is it not necessarily overt?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that is one of my most favorite things to watch. So for example, we'll have a piece, we recognize that our pieces first and foremost are like, they're mesmerizing. That is our goal, is to make them mesmerizing. And people get sucked in because they're just weird and they don't know what to make of them. And then they will read, let's say, the plaque that is next to it that explains what's going on. And it creates this whole second wave of being mesmerized again, where they now look at it with new eyes. And in some cases, it is a plaque. It is something you have to read. And in places like the Equinox piece, it becomes lore, where you kind of learn about it from the other employee and it gets passed around. And in other cases, we do go a little more overt, I would say. But in general, we kind of like this 1-2 punch of pulling people in by the aesthetic, and then kind of having some sort of way to communicate the message of what's happening underneath. I tend to reference, in Grand Central, there's the little brown square on the ceiling. That is where they didn't clean the ceiling. And there's nothing there that tells you that, but somehow the majority of New Yorkers, and it's in all the tourist guidebooks, like that's kind of the mentality that we sort of chase a little bit.
Let's get into some of the pragmatic questions here of how do you maintain these pieces in terms of, is that when you do an installation, is that kind of a partner for life in terms of this art piece and having you maintain it?
No, that's, I mean, as I said, this is pretty much the biggest thing that we pay attention to, is how to not make this terrifying to people. So all of even our bigger pieces, we do accelerated life testing as well as real-time life testing for a minimum of the equivalent of 15 years, confirming that we are not seeing any significant wear. So with the idea that all of our pieces should run for at least 15, 20 years without needing any significant maintenance. More often than not, we're more worried about, people are great in that you might get someone who runs up and smashes it with a hammer. And so we also make all of the components very easy to swap out. So it is something where we test it, we come up with a plan, and we're upfront with all of that as best we can to kind of say, okay, this is the plan, this is where you'll need us, at some point you won't. And we also are working with groups that actually look after digital and kinetic art that is agnostic. If breakfast went away, we are sharing files and so forth with those entities so that they can kind of carry this on into the future.
Gotcha. Another pragmatic question here. I should have signed a dealer representation agreement before you came on stage.
We can talk afterwards.
But what does it cost in terms of if I want to put a 10 meter piece in my
city?
What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, I will say the longevity comes with, not the cheapest things. I mean, to be honest, like any outdoor piece is definitely starting over $1 million, just to be honest. And that comes back to, we could do it for much less, but no one wants it to break, right? And so we got to pick the parts and the components that we know are going to withstand those elements. So outdoor pieces are on that scale. I'd say larger pieces that are indoor are somewhere around half that, depending. But we have pieces that start at $20K. So it's really I mean, we're working on projects that are over 10 million, and we are sending pieces out to people's homes that are, $20,000, $30,000. So it's really all over the map there.
So a lot of your work reflects some of the issues around climate change, as we were talking about, but what about actually what kinds of climates can you do these outdoor pieces in? How cold can you go?
Cold is actually great. Heat with electronics, they often don't like the heat. They usually generate a little heat and can keep the cold away. So it's more getting into the dry climates where you can't even use rubber because it'll just dry up and crack and go away, and you have to figure out all the right materials. But at the end of the day, if you're building cars and buildings and so forth in these environments, then there's no reason we can't build the pieces to withstand that as well. And so every piece will go into environmental chamber testing. So we will adapt every single piece to the climate it needs to exist in, and we go through a whole process in order to do that. So we don't just perfect the medium and say it works everywhere. We'll perfect it to the point where we know it's going to last in most places, and then if we get a more extreme weather environment, then we will adapt the design to withstand that.
So maybe one last question, at more philosophical level of, as you think about the future of public art, what is the role of public art in the urban realm? Has that changed pre-pandemic to where we are today, or what's your view on why should we be investing in public art?
Yeah, I mean, it's I want to say, I was reading an article recently that I think it was something to the effect of, for most tourists, I want to say a third of them will stay around longer in a location just to see an art piece or some sort of cultural piece. And art has this ability, public art specifically, has this ability to completely remove crime and introduce, they become tourist attractions. If you do it the right way, whether you see that as a good thing or bad thing, it can inject money into a location that might really need it. It can create an entire story and change. For example, the sea level lighthouse, if we imagine that on a pier in New York, that says something about the city. It becomes an iconic piece that means something to the people that live there, that visit there, and it's drawing people to a certain area and creating, it's changing the financial structure as well as the crime. It really can have quite a broad impact in that regard.
Right. Well, it's fascinating work. You obviously have lots of new fans just based on seeing the comments here in the chat. So
awesome.
We'll look forward to getting out and discovering some of your pieces in the real world in the near future.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.
All right, cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.